here at RevZillaTV, and today I am getting to ride the BMW R1200RS. This is the reincarnation of BMW's original sport touring machine. Now, we are here in the heart of Virginia battling the elements to talk to you about how this bike goes, how it stops, how it handles. We're also going to have a special section dedicated to engineering and electronics to talk about how BMW bridges the gap between the world of sport and touring on the RS. And as always, it wouldn't be a RevZilla review if we weren't stirring the pot, talking about modifications that we would recommend if you're going to put down long miles on this bike. Now, we have a whole mountain full of winding roads up there. Let's go have some fun. Woo-hoo! In 1976, BMW literally created the category of sport touring motorcycles with the groundbreaking R1200RS. They realized that riders looking to traverse long distances and riders looking for performance weren't mutually exclusive. Now, you fast forward 40 years to 2015, BMW doesn't even have a sport touring category of motorcycles in their lineup. The R1200RS that you're going to see here gets lumped in with sport bikes, and this is a designation that I don't find quite fitting. My guess is that riders that are looking at this bike are more likely to be looking at bikes from BMW's touring category, like the R1200RT, or even bikes from their adventure category, like the S1000XR. Now, when you get outside of the world of BMW, this bike looks like a paperweight compared to the big horsepower competition. Bikes like Kawasaki's Concourse, Yamaha's FJR, and even Triumph's Trophy will be putting out more horsepower than the RS. However, this big boxer twin lays out no less than 74 foot-pounds of torque across the entire rev range, giving you big, usable power on the street. It also comes in at just over 500 pounds wet, which is going to make this a featherweight compared to the heavyweight competition. Now, if you want to compare this against a bike that's going to be similar to size and stature, consider Honda's new VFR 800 Interceptor. It's going to be a very similar sized bike to the RS. However, the RS is going to give you more horsepower and more features than the Honda will. There's no hiding the fact that the RS's engine is going to be the standout feature for this bike, but it's really going to be the suspension and the brakes that are going to have you going fast. Now, I can't talk about that standing still, so let's go out, let's ride this bike, and we'll dig in deeper. So we are here on historic Skyline Drive, where the weather has taken a turn for the foggy and wet. But that's okay, because we are on an all-weather motorcycle. Now, the engine in this RS is going to be the same that BMW utilizes in both their GS as well as their RT. That means 1170 cc's, liquid-cooled heads, putting out 125 horsepower and 92 foot-pounds of peak torque. Now, I say peak torque because, keep in mind, this engine is going to wear 74 foot-pounds of torque throughout the entire rev range, giving it a big, powerful feel. But it does bear to mention that when you're spinning this up from 8,000 RPMs to the red line, it has a tendency to lose speed. So if you're used to riding a big four where you make your power up top, it's going to take a little while to get used to this engine. Now, this engine is going to put power to the ground via 6-speed transmission, and it's going to be helped out by a slipper clutch as well as Shift Assist Pro. Now, Shift Assist Pro is seamless. I don't have to use my hands to shift, and I can work my way all the way up through the gears and down, and it's absolutely phenomenal. Now, you do have to be clear of first through second and well into third before you start playing around in it. If you're down in first, second gear, definitely make sure you're using your hand to actuate that clutch. Even when you do that, lower speeds, it tends to be a little bit clunky. Now, when I talked earlier about the engine being a real favorite of mine, but it's not going to be what gets you through the corners fast, that's because the brakes and the suspension on this bike are really what's going to instill confidence. When you're flying through a corner, the big Brembo brakes on this allow me to slow down quickly. Radial mounted calipers up front, Brembo caliper out back,
really does a great job of slowing the bike down fast. ABS comes standard and I can turn it off with the push of a button, but in these wet roads, ABS works flawlessly. Now, as far as the levers on this bike are concerned, it's going to be a very progressive feel. I'm going to be pulling back, nothing, and up. There it is. That's the braking I was expecting. So it takes a while to get used to. I like a more linear feel, and this is a very progressive setup. Now, the front lever is also going to actuate the front and the rear brake, and that's because the brakes on this bike are linked together, and there's no way to disable that. The rear pedal still just actuates the rear. Now, as I go through the corners, I can brake a little bit later. That's going to give me more confidence to build up speed. Now, once I'm going through the corners, the suspension takes over. This bike is going to be set up with BMW's DESA, Dynamic Electronic Suspension Adjustment. That means that with the push of a button, I can control preload as well as damping, and these are going to be the most sophisticated forks and rear shock that I've ever used. It simply works, and it takes all the guesswork out of the suspension setup. That's going to take us right into electronics and chassis and how BMW really finds a way to mix sport and touring with this motorcycle. So let's pull over and dig into that a little bit more in depth.
So we have seen sport touring motorcycles getting bigger and heavier as time has progressed, lending themselves more to the touring side of their roots and really abandoning the sporting side. One of the things that BMW makes no apologies for with the new R1200RS is that this is going to tip the scales more on the sporting side of the sport touring world. Now keep in mind, when we're talking about a sport touring motorcycle, there's a duality of functionality going on here. This bike is supposed to wear two hats equally well. Now, what engineers did with this particular bike is they utilized both electronics as well as engineering to really fine-tune those two worlds together. So, starting with the engineering aspect of this, BMW really did a great job of not making this just a lightweight motorcycle, but also really distributing the weight evenly. There's nearly a 50-50 split between the front wheel as well as the back wheel, which gives this bike a really nice balanced feel when you're out on the road. As far as chassis design is concerned, they optimize things like rake, trail, and wheelbase to give this bike maximum stability when you're on the highway, so you can be doing 100 miles an hour, look down, and it feels smooth as butter. Now, when we're talking about the ergonomics on this, you can see right from the get-go, it's definitely going to have drop bars. It's going to keep you in more of that full tuck position. But when BMW went at this from the electronic standpoint, they literally pulled out all the stops, and they're going to give you one of the most intense electronic packages available on motorcycles today. Things like ASC, ABS, and rider modes all work in conjunction to allow riders to really fine-tune the experience that they're looking for out of their motorcycle. So whether you're looking for Jekyll or Hyde, whether you're looking for a comfort tourer or a backroad burner, you're going to be able to dial it in with the RS. Now, I can only talk about so much of this standing still, and I have an entire mountain of curvy roads behind me. So let's go out, let's hit the twisties, and we'll show you exactly what the RS can do.
So the weather here in Virginia can't figure out what it wants to do. Does it want to rain? Does it want to be sunny? Much like this bike can't figure out whether it wants to be a sport bike or a touring bike. Now, where we left off earlier, we were talking about the suspension and really how it affects handling, and that's going to come into play with the electronics and engineering on this bike that BMW is going to use to bridge the gap between the two worlds of sporting and touring. Now, first and foremost, the chassis design on this has been completely redone from the ground up to give you more rake, more trail, and a longer wheelbase than a traditional sport bike. That means stability at higher speeds while still maintaining a nice sporty functionality when you're flying through the twisties like up here on Skyline Drive. Now, when you get into some real tight twisties and also at low speeds around the city, the bike does have a tendency to wear its weight a little bit more, and you have to fight back by pushing your weight around as the rider to really wrestle it through the corners. Now, with the weight on this bike, it's not so much the fact that BMW's cut weight, but it's also about how it's cut weight. The engine is going to be a stress member of the frame, which allows BMW to lower weight, but also lower the center of gravity. So this is going to aid in both stability on highway speeds, but also that nimbleness that you would expect from a sport bike when you're going through the twisties. Now, as far as the electronics on this bike, they're some of the most sophisticated electronics in motorcycling today. The ride modes comes standard with both rain and road, and this doesn't just control throttle response, it also controls how much interference you're going to get from the ABS and ASC systems. ASC stands for Automatic Stability Control, which monitors wheel slip. Now this is going to give you more confidence when you're going through wet conditions like we've seen here today, and if you want to turn it off and get a more sporting experience, with the push of a button, I can disable ASC, pull the front wheel off the ground, slide the rear tire a little bit, and really have some fun with this bike. The other piece of electronics on here that I really like that my bike comes with the option for is electronic cruise control. And it can be activated in any gear. So I'm in third gear right now. I can take my right hand off completely, give you little finger guns right there, and not have to worry about anything. Now this isn't to say that the RS is perfect. This is a bike that's trying to wear two hats and wear them equally well, and it does a good job of coming up as a compromise between a sport and a touring motorcycle. There's some things here that need to be pointed out too as far as the rider position. It's a little bit more of a full tuck. I'm not going to have all the wind protection the way a standard touring bike would have. And the dash on this, I have 3 different styles to choose from, and I don't like any of them. All I want is a big tack that I can actually see and read. Now, I spent the past 2 weeks tearing around on this motorcycle, and there's a lot about this bike that I really like. However, there are a few modifications that I would want to address before I put this bike in my garage. So let's pull over and we'll talk about those right now.
Now the BMW R1200RS, this isn't a bike for everyone, and that's okay. This is going to be an odd duck in the world of big 4 and big triple power, and honestly, I like that. This is going to be a lightweight machine, big torquey engine, great brakes, and great suspension. This is going to put the sport back in sport touring. Now, our bike as tested comes in just over 18 grand, and while that's a fair chunk of change for a motorcycle, BMW packs a lot of technology into this bike. However, there's one main component they missed, and that's hard luggage. I don't think it's fair for BMW to charge me extra for the touring side of my sport touring motorcycle. Hard luggage should be standard on this bike. Now, as far as modifications that I would make, there's 2 main mods that come to mind right from the get-go. First and foremost, crash protection. Look at those giant cylinders hanging off the side of the bike. This isn't going to be like a fully faired bike where if you go down on a low side, you can pick it back up with some scraped fairings. Instead, you're going to rip off half the engine on this. I need big, beefy crash protection the same way a GS rider would expect. Now, the second modification I would make, bar risers for this. While I like the more sporty tuck position, I'm also 32 years old, and this is something that doesn't bother me. Now, considering BMW's demographic for this bike is probably going to range between 30 and 50-year-old riders, there's going to be a split somewhere right down the middle, and the more seasoned riders will appreciate a more comfortable upright ride. Now, that's not going to be too hard to do. You can CNC a plate that fits right underneath this handlebar riser, pop it in there, and it's simply going to bring the handlebars up and back for added comfort. Now, if you have additional questions about the R1200RS, or maybe you want to hear more about our trip down here to Virginia and the Blue Ridge Mountains, head over to Common Tread and read my detailed write-up where I get into all the facts that I simply just didn't have time to cover in this video. Now, if you still have questions, or maybe you want to weigh in with an opinion of your own, make sure to do so in the comments section below, and subscribe to us on YouTube to keep up with all the bike reviews that we're going to have rolling out. Thank you for joining us for this look at the BMW R1200RS. I'm Spurge. Enjoy the ride.